We now turn our attention to this question from a listener in Brea, California, who says, "Could you please explain Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verse 28? It seems to be speaking badly about women."
Well, let me say that I think that you have misunderstood that verse that is in Ecclesiastes. To begin with, the verses in Ecclesiastes and also in the book of Proverbs are sometimes put in a series. You see, verse divisions were made by man long after the Bible was written. And the verse method, of course, enables you and me to get around in the Bible. We wouldn't be able to do it if it wasn't for chapters and verses, and we'd have a real problem. Therefore, we need to recognize that many of these, you just can't take it out and look at it by itself. Now, the verse that you refer to, I'm going to turn to it and read it. It's in chapter 7, and it's verse 28. Let me read the verse now by itself. "Which yet my soul seeketh, but I find not. One man among 1,000 have I found, but a woman among all those have I not found." Now, by taking that out of its context here, you get the impression that he's saying here that only one man in 1,000 could be trusted, and only one woman, or no woman in 1,000 could be trusted. And all that he's doing is making a contrast here. But let's back up into this and see what he's talking to us about. In verse 25, I'm going to begin reading there. "I applied mine heart to know and to search and to seek out wisdom and the reason of things, and to know the wickedness of folly, even of foolishness and madness." Now, this is Solomon's pursuit of knowledge, of wisdom. And he says, "And I find more bitter than death the woman whose heart is snares and nets, and her hands as bands." And Solomon's experience with women, and he certainly had quite a bit of experience, was not very satisfactory. He found that most of them were very deceitful, and naturally the ones that he brought into Jerusalem, into his harem, were women who were princes from all the kings in that area. And you know what the king would tell his daughter. Says, "Let me know what Solomon's doing." And I have a notion that there was a mole. Every one of those women was a mole in the palace of Solomon. And he had a good reason, I think, not to trust them. And so what he's speaking to us about is his experience. He says, "And I find more bitter than death the woman whose heart is snares and nets, and her hands as bands. Whoso pleaseth God shall escape from her, but the sinner shall be taken by her." And through the book of Proverbs was that warning against the woman who is depicted there as the harlot. And then he goes on to say, "Behold, this have I found, saith the preacher, counting one by one to find out the account, which yet my soul seeketh, but I find not one man. Among 1,000 have I found, but a woman among all those have I not found." And what he's saying is he hasn't even found one man that he can trust. And there's no woman that he was able to trust. Well, of the 1,000 that he married, I have a notion that there was not one out of that crowd that he really could trust. They were largely, most of them, princesses, daughters of kings and government men, politicians of that day. And it was a group that was spying on him all the time. And therefore, that was his experience. Now, that doesn't mean that they're not godly women and godly men. Solomon is giving his experience, and this is what he found out. I found out differently myself. I thank God in my ministry for the godly women that God has put across my pathway. When I was a student, I was helped by these women that were godly. I actually feel that I was led into the ministry because one woman just insisted I go to a youth camp. She was a very godly woman and followed my ministry as long as she lived. And there have been others, and then the Lord gave me a wonderful wife that's been a blessing to me, and a woman I can trust. May I say to you that my experience is different than Solomon, and Solomon's just giving you his experience. Now, don't say that you don't know a godly woman, because you do, and you mentioned her, and that is certainly consistent. And I feel like that you've taken, therefore, this verse really out of context, that it's merely Solomon giving us his experience. And I'll be very frank with you, I wouldn't want to use his experience as being the norm for my life, because for sure I haven't had to take on the support of 1,000 wives. I'm of the opinion I would have made a miserable failure there.